Hello, welcome to me and Anna talking about hEDS.
And
I'm
sex.
Nick and sex. I can't forget that. I'm Nick, they, them pronouns,
I'm Anna, also they, them pronouns.
and we are in the Widener sex therapy program, master's students getting through it. Cool. So I guess I will start us off talking about what is hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorder. Um, it is the most common of 13 types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome disorders, which are all rare, comprehensive, heritable connective tissue disorders. Inheritable? Heritable.
Heritable.
Heritable. Okay. It currently accounts for 90% of all EDS cases. It's thought to affect one in every 3,100 to 5,000 people, but that is a gross underestimation, which we will get into a little bit more. There are three known phases of hEDS, which is hypermobility, pain, and stiffness. Causes have not been identified necessarily, but the condition appears to follow an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern, meaning each child of a parent with hEDS will have a 50% chance of having hEDS. I also, on my own research, have found that small fiber neuropathy diagnoses through skin biopsies are becoming a more known way of diagnosing hEDS. And I did that
That's really
because
cool.
when mine came back positive, no one messaged me about it, and I had to figure that out. Yeah.
That's actually kind of cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I brought it up to my PT, and they're like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. Features include widespread faulty connective tissue and collagen. As connective tissue is throughout the body, it affects the whole body. Some most well-known symptoms that we'll dive more into are joint subluxations and dislocations, sprains, tissue laxity and dysfunction, and widespread joint instability that can cause both acute and chronic pain. Some other more common symptoms include gastrointestinal problems, chronic fatigue, migraines, brain fog, widespread chronic pain, as mentioned, skin, um, sensitive skin, abnormal scarring, skin hypersensitivity, or skin hyperextensibility, and dysautonomia or dysautonomia. I can never get that right.
Either one. Yeah.
Assessment is mainly focused on the joints using the Baeten scoring system to measure joint hypermobility on a 9-point scale. There is like a lot of visuals that you can find about how that's done, but also just general like examining of joint like hypermobility can lead to an hEDS diagnosis. Lots of comorbidities, including mast cell activation diseases, fibromyalgia, hypothyroidism, irritable bowel syndrome, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease, PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, and a strong association is found between hEDS or HSD and ADHD and ASD. More research is in the works, but there is a strong correlation. And I will also add that my PT said that a lot of the connective tissue disorder has to do with a lack of processing spatial awareness in the brain from the ligaments, which will also correlate with ADHD spatial awareness and bumping into things all the time. Fun facts.
Yeah.
I love how
We like bumped into stuff before this, like right as we were doing this was bumping into stuff.
absolutely. So why do we say hEDS or HSD? Um, there's been proposal in the science community that hypermobility exists on a spectrum, but there is clinical criteria for hEDS to receive a diagnosis, but those who don't fully meet that criteria are considered to have HSD. Um, but there's not too much clinical distinction between HSD and hEDS, because they can both experience similar physical and mental symptoms and functional limitations. And again, like it's a spectrum, so you know, that's where it exists on a spectrum. It's more common in people assigned female at birth, which we hyphenate as AFAB people. Um, so our focus for this today is going to be including mostly people with vulvas, and some possible explanations as to why it is more common in AFAB people or more commonly studied in AFAB people is theorized because of hormones, as one of the possibilities where higher levels of estrogen and progesterone can cause tendon and ligament laxity, which can predispose people assigned female at birth to higher rates of connective tissue disorders or injury with that. And because of the three phases that we mentioned earlier of hypermobility, pain, and stiffness, um, conclusions have been made that AFAB people progress to the second phase faster because of the hormones that we mentioned. And then also things like hormonal contraceptives that can contain progestin have been shown to reduce hEDS symptoms, which was an interesting fact I found, because it acts very similar to testosterone in the body and lowers uh, relaxin levels, which are responsible for the tendon ligament laxity. Um, Other considerations of why is heterosexism or hegemonic masculinity. Ultimately, a key component of heterosexuality is that it naturalizes dominant identities and ideologies about gender and sexuality, including compulsory able-bodiedness. So all of that kind of means people assigned male at birth are probably less likely to go to the doctor, and acknowledge that something doesn't feel good or right. Yeah, Anna, take it away.
Perfect. So let's just dive into some more symptoms and specifically how this can impact sex, because obviously there are a ton of like just generalized symptoms that you're experiencing systemically, but how might these specifically impact sex? And again, there is such little research about people with penises, people who are assigned male at birth. So again, most of this research and most of these studies that we're going to cite are based on people with vulvas. So there are a ton of pelvic floor symptoms that come with HEDS or HSD. Stress urinary incontinence, which is basically when you like clench, you flex, you strain, you exercise. So things like sneezing, jumping, coughing, like the people who pee when they jump on the trampoline. It's experienced by 60% of people with hEDS, according to a couple studies. And then urgency urinary incontinence, which I did not know what this was, but it's basically feeling like you have to pee right now. Like it comes on super suddenly and you absolutely cannot wait to go to the bathroom. That is urgency urinary incontinence, and 54% of people with hEDS experience that. Painful and heavy periods are experienced by 93% of people who menstruate with hEDS. Pain after sex is experienced by 77% of people. And multiple miscarriages are a lot more common with people with hEDS. So all of these are things that can impact sex and sexuality. Pelvic organ prolapse is also more common. So 21% of people with hEDS may experience a pelvic organ prolapse. So that could be your bladder or a uterus. And your risk of prolapse increases the further you go above 40. So the older you get, the more likely it is for it to happen. And if it's happened once, it's more likely to happen again. And that is something that is definitely important to consider when you are having sexual negotiations and when you're talking to a partner about what you can and want to do. Another thing is labial edema, which basically means the swelling of your labia, and not just like a little bit, like a lot of it. It tends to happen with trauma. So after penetrative sex is when it tends to be the most common. And that is a lot more likely to happen to someone who has hEDS or HSD. And that's because, again, of the tissue issues that we're having. And so that even a little bit of trauma feels like a lot of trauma to our body. And so I think it's important to just think about how might these considerations impact your sexual negotiations. And then obviously there's chronic pain, right? So in one study, nearly half of their participants screened positive for having potential sexual dysfunction. So because of this pain, because of the pelvic organ prolapse, because of incontinence issues, they were testing positive for having sexual dysfunction. And that's not even counting all the widespread chronic joint pain that you're experiencing from pretty constant subluxations and dislocations. So Nick kind of mentioned that a dislocation is coming fully out of the socket. A subluxation is, it kind of goes partially out, or maybe it goes out and then pops right back in. So those are very common for people with hEDS. And the strain of life in general puts a lot of weight on our bodies, especially because of the faulty connective tissue. Basically, our muscles are working like 1,000% overdrive because our connective tissue isn't holding us together, our muscles are. So that means even things like sitting upright in a chair, holding your head straight can be exhausting for people with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And oftentimes too, because of the looseness in our joints, we want to feel like a sense of like comfort. So we might put ourselves into a position of hyperextendedness because we want to feel that feeling of like our joints are being held into place. And it's also really misunderstood and underdiagnosed. Nick kind of touched on this earlier, but most people with hypermobility struggle to find a competent medical provider, which creates medical anxiety. And it takes on average 10 to 12 years to obtain a diagnosis. So like Nick mentioned, because people who are assigned female at birth are hitting that pain phase sooner because of hormones, that makes sense why we are seeing more people being diagnosed who are AFAB, because again, people who are AMAB might not be having the entering the pain phase as soon. And then it takes 10 years after that, after you begin seeking treatment because of maybe entering the pain phase or noticing that something is wrong, it can take 10 to 12 years on average. And that's on average, so it could definitely be a lot longer. And so it's really important for us as a community to share our knowledge and to share resources and talk about what we can do to improve our lives, sexual, social, everything. And then to talk a little bit about how this might psychologically impact us. So we obviously have some physical limitations due to chronic pain and fatigue, and that can often force us to have to limit our social interactions. So then it kind of creates this awful cycle where it's like we can't participate in our social relationships because the relationships exacerbate our fatigue, but then we miss our friends, and so we push ourselves to go out. And so it kind of creates this awful cycle of exhaustion where it feels almost impossible to meet new friends and to form new relationships and interact socially. And that's not, of course, the experience for everyone, but it is a really common experience for people with hEDS. And then, of course, socially as well, ableism is something that exists out in the world, and the fear of it can greatly impact the disclosure of a condition. So not everyone with hEDS uses mobility aids. Some people do to make their life easier, but that can come with its own internalized ableism and feeling like you can't use it because you don't necessarily need it, it's a whole other thing. But because of that, it is generally an invisible disability. And so you do have to disclose that. And so this fear of ableism might like limit your ability to disclose, might hinder your ability to seek out these relationships. And especially when we're talking about sexual negotiations, right? We have these ideas and these thoughts around like, what is normal sex? What is sexy? And you might not think like, hey, can we lay a towel down because sometimes I pee a little bit during sex. Might not be a sexy conversation to you. It might be to someone else. but it's important for us to talk about it and to kind of break down those barriers so we can talk about what we actually need during sex. So passing off to Nick about politics.
Politics. So, a couple of things to consider in the political realm involving hEDS is qualifying for disability is less likely with people with an hEDS diagnosis. As Anna kind of mentioned, it's an invisible disability, to put quotations around that. So disclosing, um, you know, is something that is often required, and as well as, the 10 to 12 years on average of obtaining a diagnosis, that will prolong someone's ability to potentially even qualify for disability. And that includes things like getting disability car placards, are more difficult to obtain. Disability pay is minimal already, and actively barricades disabled people from collecting wealth, which we could go into a whole tangent on that if we wanted to, which we do, but we don't have time for. Um, as well, a disability status comes with marriage inequality. Super big factor. So, qualifying for disability in itself is difficult. But then, deciding if being on disability is like going to be accommodating for what you want in your life, that's also a whole other thing to consider. Also to consider insurance and financial restrictions, especially for medical appointments, testing, which is often a lot during finding an hEDS diagnosis, especially if you're starting from like point zero of having no idea what's going on. Um, Mobility aids are expensive, aids in general are expensive. And insurance might not even cover most of those things, even if you do have a diagnosis. Also to consider parents who are uninsured or underinsured, or have a general distrust of medicine are less likely to bring their children to the doctor, especially if the ailment is considered minor, maybe non-existent. Um, and it is therefore like less likely to be assessed and receive testing or be able to afford testing. Um, Also, a big factor in the political realm of things is neoliberalism, which ultimately is something that values individuality, individual responsibility, self-sufficiency, competition, efficiency, profit, capitalism, all that stuff. And so people who have internalized these neoliberal values are much less likely to empathize with chronically ill and disabled people, especially those with hEDS. Um, and health can manifest as a consumer identity. So that means that health can be advertised and sold on the market. So those who can afford it will be closer to this idealized health or able-bodiedness, but those who cannot, will be further away from this idealized health, quote around that, whatever that actually means. Also consider that healthcare professionals and medical insurance companies act as gatekeepers. Insurance specifically, patients with HMO insurance plans require referrals sometimes, especially for specialty providers. So that puts PCPs and primary care providers in the way of getting an hEDS diagnosis indefinitely until they're willing to, submit those referrals. So if you're not believed by your primary care provider, you're likely not to get that referral and be able to get evaluated. There's also an increased cost associated with PPO insurance plans, which are often covering more services. And considering what is even covered by Medicare and Medicaid, that would, help with evaluating an hEDS diagnosis. Also to consider are long wait lists for specialists. Can wait years. It's very hard to get into some doctors, especially like geneticists who will, be able to like check off if you have something much easier. It's also important to consider like lower survival rates due to misdiagnosis and gatekeeping by primary care providers. And that can include things like medical issues increasing that affect someone's ability to stay alive. It can include suicidality from chronic pain, just some examples. And ultimately, all of this keeps the sick and disabled people too sick and disabled to be able to fight or advocate, which ties into eugenics and sick, mad, disabled genocide, which is a whole other tangent again that we could go on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Move
I think
on.
that's so important. Yeah, that's so important to talk about too, like the misconception of like something being a rare disorder, so being harder to get a diagnosis because it's considered rare. So then it just like feeds the cycle of underdiagnosis. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's exactly why zebras are like the whole thing for HEDS. You explain it. I'm not good at that one.
Yeah, it's like the concept that when doctors are going through medical school, they're told when you hear hoofbeats in the hallway, think horses, not zebras, which means to think of the more common conditions before the rare ones. And so people with HEDS have kind of adopted the zebra as our mascot because it's rare and it's here. And we are begging to just look at a zebra. Sometimes it is a zebra, not a horse, and that's okay. So I think that's a good one. But let's move on to the juicy stuff. Let's talk about actually what sex can look like when you need like accommodations. What can accommodating your sex life look like? Um, so to start out, like one thing to take note of is that a lot of disabled people often pick disabled partners, and that is to avoid casual ableism from their partner and to have a partner that may be able to better understand their needs and the creativity that might be necessary to bring to their sex life. But because of the inherent invisibility of HEDS, HSD, and the really long diagnosis period, that might not necessarily be something that a lot of people with HEDS can identify with. They may struggle to identify as disabled. They may not have a disabled community that they can rely on. And so there can be at higher risk for experiencing ableism from their partners in their relationship because of this necessity to disclose later in the relationship. Because most people aren't disclosing on the first date, like, hey, by the way, I'm disabled. Maybe some people are. It's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. So it's important to note that like there's some absolute beauty in disabled relationships, but interabled relationships are very common. And what can you do if you are in an interabled relationship to communicate your needs more thoroughly? So to start off, I want to talk about lube because lube is very important, especially when you have sensitive skin. One, it's important for lubrication so that your skin doesn't get irritated as easily, even if you don't think you need lube. Every type of sex is better with lube. It doesn't matter. Lube always makes it better. You can't like, it's great. Use lube. It's okay. You are not bad because you need lube. You are not like your partner's not doing a bad job if you need lube. It's okay to need and want lube. We love it. But like Nick mentioned earlier, people with hypermobility tend to have more sensitive and reactive skin, especially if you have comorbid mast cell activation syndrome or disorder. You can react to things very randomly. So some ingredients to look out for if you are choosing a water-based lube is glycerin. That is going to be in your run-of-the-mill gas station ones like Astroglide. I'm trying to think of other ones. Astroglide is the first one that comes to my head. Those ones have glycerin in them, and those can definitely be irritating. If you are using a glycerin-free one, you're still finding irritation. Citric acid is another ingredient that tends to be irritating. So if you're choosing a water-based lube, definitely check your ingredients. Sutil is my personal favorite water-based brand that doesn't have citric acid or glycerin. I really like that one. It's a nice thick jelly, so it adds a little bit of extra cushion when you're using it. Oil-based lubes are also lovely. They can be really hydrating. They don't get sticky like a water-based can because there's no water to dissolve. But it might not provide as much cushion as like the thicker jelly water ones. Same with silicone. And an oil-based lube is not going to be safe to use with polyurethane condoms or elastomer toys. So that could be like a lot of cock rings, jelly toys, the OhnutCo, which I will mention later, do not worry. You cannot use oil-based lubes with those ones. And then silicone lube, it's generally thought of as hypoallergenic, but you can react to anything. And if you react to a silicone lube, that's okay. You're not broken. Just try a different one, a different lube. Generally not safe to use if you are using silicone toys. So if you have those, that is a very important consideration. Also, they stain your bed sheets. And if you spill it on like a hardwood floor, it is very, very slippery. So be careful. Be careful when you're using lube. Make sure that it goes where it needs to go. Oil-based also stains, by the way. And it is a good idea to do a skin test before you use it, especially if you have MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome. But you also just might not react until it's in contact with your mucous membranes, like the vagina is, or a mouth or nose, or any of those lovely membranes. So what do you do if you do react? Stop having sex. Stop what you were doing. Do not just like continue through that burning pain. It's not worth it. And then go soak in some warm water. That'll help draw it out. Add some baking soda to the water to neutralize it if it's really, really bad. Otherwise, try to just like let it soak out. Do not continue having sex. Please stop. It's okay. Something else that is a good important consideration is how you're holding your toys. So finger subluxations are really common. You'll often see people with hEDS wearing finger splints to help them from hyperextending or their fingers from subluxing. So is carpal tunnel and tendonitis. Those are really common to have with hEDS. So the way you hold a toy might be really important. So something with a longer handle that you can have more leverage on or can hold with two hands. Something with a larger base to grip so that you're not like grabbing something tiny. Something that's hands-free or has a loop at the bottom that you can just hold your fingers in and don't have to have a grip on might be super helpful and a way to accommodate using your sex toys. And then just a little disclaimer here that if you can afford it, please try to buy body safe toys. So that would mean things like silicone, metal, glass, some woods, depending on how they're treated, especially when you have hEDS and can have more sensitive skin. Fully understand that they are expensive, so it can take years to build up your toy collection. But if you can, please try to buy body safe toys because that will be better for your body in the long run. And to talk about some specific toys, I listed a few off that I have just off the top of my head. LELO and FunFactory both tend to have loops on the bottom. Some of their toys do. FunFactory, it's almost all of them. LELO, it's not all of them, but it's some of them have loops on the bottom so you can hold with like a couple fingers rather than gripping it, which are great for reduced grip strength. Liberator positioning pillows. So those are a specific brand of these like really nice pillows that you can use for positioning that are pretty firm but soft and have these removable, washable, waterproof covers, but they are very expensive. So you can use normal pillows, maybe get like a microfiber cover so that way they don't get whatever juices all over them. And pregnancy pillows are actually a really great alternative. They are also expensive, but they're great to use for sleep because they support your body really well. Things like a positioning strap might be helpful. So that would be, there are a couple different types, but the one I'm talking about right now is one where it's like it goes across your stomach and a partner can hold it to help you hold your body up, maybe during like doggy style or anything like that. So it can help hold your body up and position your hips in a way that's more comfortable. The bump-in toy, obviously, would not be an accessible sex toy talk if I didn't talk about that. It's really amazing and could be great for someone who's dealing with a really bad pain flare-up with hEDS and is really struggling to move comfortably. It could be a really amazing tool to use during any kind of like intense pain flare-ups, and it can absolutely be used with a partner. So it's a great toy. Highly recommend looking it up. And the OhnutCo, I did mention a little bit earlier, but the OhnutCo is, it's like a customizable length thing. So if you are someone who's having sex with a biological penis, with a human penis, it is like a stackable cock ring that's nice and squishy. So it just decreases the length that can be inserted during penetrative sex. So if you are someone who has a lot of pain with penetration, that could provide that nice buffer so that things aren't quite so painful for you. But it is made of a porous material. I want to mention that. That is so that it can be used with silicone lube for people who have pelvic floor problems. But that means that please do not share it between partners. It is not safe to be shared with fluids because it is porous. Something like a thigh strap. So that would be like a harness for your thigh. So that way, because like moving your hips is really a lot of work. I don't know if any of you have ever tried it, but it's a lot. And if you want to use it for solo play, you can put it around a pillow. There are lots of ways that a thigh strap can be used. And another strap harness that I love is a hand one. So it can be used to put on the base, on the palm of your hand, so you could have a hands open motion. You can put it on your knuckles, so you have a punching motion. Anything that takes, it allows you to use different muscles in your arms and to reduce the grip strength you need to have on the base of the dildo. Or I guess you could use it for a butt plug, but that would be a little different. But that's just a couple off the top of my head, obviously. And I think creativity in sex is what disabled sex and crip sex is about. So that means maybe finding new uses for already existing toys or using innocuous items to spice up and accommodate your sex life. Sex toys are expensive. If you are on disability and cannot accrue wealth, purchasing these toys can be a massive barrier. So have creativity. Talk to your disabled friends. It's all about sharing in community because your average sex ed is not going to teach you the creative ways in which you can use every type of vibrator. So I'd love to pass it off to Nick to talk a little bit more about kink and hypermobility.
Oh, yeah, very thorough. Thank you. A great setup for where I'm going. So yes, kink and hypermobility. Also, as you know, Anna was saying, by all means, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some things that are off the top of our head, key things that came up in some initial research, things from our own experiences, things from the community. You know, there's always more. So, you know, kink 101, BDSM 101. Before we're going to follow basic kink negotiation, as you always should. And that can look different for lots of people, but it also, with people with hypermobility, HEDS, will definitely include conversations around mobility limitation, specific joints of concern, pain levels, comforts with bruising, because there's higher risk of bruising, comfort with rope burn, because there's high risk of rope burn, with skin sensitivity, as we kind of mentioned. Also considering crip time, which is something very interesting that I want to dive more into, but ultimately crip time means it's probably going to take longer than you expect. And you know, you just have to go with it. It's kind of
That's so
like
cool.
your
I
time.
never heard that.
I
I've
didn't
like never heard
either.
that concept and I love it. It is gonna take longer.
Gonna take longer. And you're gonna have to probably take breaks. Snacks, rehydrate, crib time. Love it. That also means before sex, we're gonna make sure that we're properly eating and feeding our bodies. That might include higher salt intakes, especially with people who are hypermobile, especially if you have POTS. And we're gonna hydrate. We're gonna stay hydrated. We love having a big thing of water right next to our scene. Cool. So jumping in, first I'm going to talk a little bit about restraints, especially focusing on ropes. And we're going to go by different like categories of things that we need to consider specific to HEDS. Yeah. So first, dislocation or subluxation. We'll kind of just combine them for the purpose of this. Um, it could happen from fainting, especially if your hands are tied above your head. That can happen with anyone, but especially more common with people with HEDS. So it's also recommended to correct someone's posture before binding them in a position in general. But some extra considerations are to include correct joint placements and binding in positions where joints are secure and aren't in a hyperextended position or at risk of slipping into a hyperextended position. So ties might look a little different for that. And I somewhere in my notes it's on here, but like thicker ties are more secure. Maybe small, delicate ties sometimes might look more aesthetic, but they're not going to be as supportive as thicker ties. Um, Muscle fatigue and cramping is important to think about. Especially with hEDS, muscles are holding up your body and holding your body together because your ligaments are not doing it very well. And so muscle fatigue is a huge factor to consider because yeah, your body's going to be trying to hold itself up in new ways that you may not have done before if you're being suspended, for example. Um, General muscle conditioning is important. Maybe you want to look into if it's accessible for you, getting a PT, physical therapist, or something, some kind of routine that's building some like muscle strength in specific areas that you might be trying to suspend from that will help kind of keep your body more comfortable while you're doing some rope play. Um, Also, being aware of how to recruit the appropriate muscle engagement to not hyperextend is really important because it can lead to more nerve issues if not. Um, and, you know, muscle fatigue or rope play in general can be exhausting no matter like what you're doing. But with people with hEDS, you know, the specific muscle fatigue in areas that you may not even think about is something to consider. Also, for many of us, spastic muscles take over the lax joints. So if we cramp up more, especially around joints, that can alter our stability. So positioning needs might include quick changes. So that's something to consider, being able to have like some rope cutters, some maybe Velcro rope or something, some Velcro restraints that can easily be moved without having to do a whole untie will be really important as well. Also really important to think about nerve irritation or damage. It's something that everyone should consider when doing rope play. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, small fiber neuropathy being at play within hEDS, nerve compression is more likely and more likely to cause widespread discomfort and pain. Um, and you don't want to work through that. You want to make yourself feel more comfortable because nerve irritation and damage is very likely. um, Skin irritation too. Important. Yeah, people can get blisters, irritations, marks much more easily. And skin integrity can be lesser with people with hEDS. So things like needle play, which is not necessarily what I'm talking about right now, could take a longer time to heal. So choosing softer restraints and rope um, to consider how much it might bruise you is really important as well. And Anna, you mentioned something, please.
Yeah, I actually have a couple things I want to mention with like picking rope like types. Like there are types that are softer on the skin, but they might slip out of knots more easily. So they might slip and become too tight. So that's something that's really important to kind of educate yourself on is the type of rope you're using and how soft it is, but also how slippery it is, and if it might slip out of these knots. So if you're doing suspension, if it could cut in too deeply or anything like that. So but also with skin irritation, PVC tape, PVC vinyl tape is a type of tape that doesn't stick to your skin. It sticks to itself. So it can be a great alternative for like if you get rope burns really easily, you don't want that. But or you just want like a nice quick little, like, let's just wrap up something real quick. It can also kind of be used in a pinch to like keep your wrist together, or like use it on like a nice movable like small joint. Like you could use it really quickly as like a like makeshift brace. It's not a brace, but you know, like to just like provide some support. So PVC vinyl tape is a great option as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Also we'll talk about circulation, blood pressure, something to be aware of. As I mentioned, POTS as a comorbidity is high with hEDS. So, thinking about how the body reacts with POTS is important. Um, if you have POTS, you know more how your body will work with you. Signs of feeling like you are going to pass out might be looking different for you than it might for other people. Having hands tied above the head can increase risks of fainting, and shouldn't be done for extended periods of time, especially in standing positions. Hypermobile people, or people who have low blood pressure, that can cause a lot of issues, especially with having hands above the head. And we want to look out for blood supply being affected, or poor circulation in general by, if something's too tight, if something slips and is then too tight in a specific spot. Those are important to look out for. And the rope top should have a solid, extensive education of nerve-related issues, in terms of like blood pooling and circulation, in general. So that's just really something important to make sure that you're keeping in mind. Um, Aside from that, rope can act similarly to things like the body braid, which is often used by people with hEDS to kind of keep your body feeling secure. Um, some toy supply recommendations for restraints include that PVC vinyl tape Anna mentioned, Velcro closure cuffs for quick access, in case of subluxations or dislocations. We love some chair or furniture ties, also love some mobility aid wheelchair ties, super cool, super hot, floor ties, rope mummification, and ball ties specifically are something that you could dabble in because they're pretty removable, in a pinch. Leather. I could go into leather so much more, but I'm not going to right now. But leather is more supportive on joints, especially in the wrist and the ankle. So like leather cuffs might be more supportive. And that's also why you see people with hEDS often maybe wearing leathers, because it kind of just holds the body together, holds the ribs together. I've seen that a lot. So yeah, leather, love that. Has a really good purpose with hypermobility. Um, as I mentioned before, bulkier ties are more supportive, and the chest, hips, and legs ideally should be all supported together as much as possible. Um, some other recommendations are to not do any deep stretches before tying, even though that's often recommended for rope bottoms, because stretching, is not the best for people with hEDS, with the ligaments, already being lax. It can make things worse. So sticking to small dynamic movements to prepare your muscles that won't hurt your joints, would be beneficial to switch out with, maybe not hypermobile people stretching. Consider aids and braces that you use, maybe tying in a way that is similar to those aids and braces to replicate them can create more stability. Um, Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of something like a wrist brace by having some kind of tie here that's holding your arm from going like this, your wrist from going like that for carpal tunnel, for example. Um, yeah, and that especially works well for things like harnesses. Um, Wearing a collar, if the neck is a problem area or it's unsafe to pull on the area, leashes might not be ideal, hair pulling might not be ideal. So a chest harness with O-rings is definitely recommended as an alternate way of being able to kind of pull someone from the front or the back without, the risk of the neck doing something weird. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about impact. Bruising is definitely something to consider with hEDS because it is more common with skin, lax, and irritability. Um, People find that sometimes the upper part of the butt is still a little meaty that people might lean towards being able to hit, but it can really kind of hurt the joints in the hips, especially, causing a lot of unwanted pain. So maybe the lower portions of the butt, um, or the back of the thighs would be more ideal as opposed to the higher buttocks closer to the hip area. Um,
I
yeah,
think it might be too with like an impact play is to have a conversation with if either you're topping or whoever is topping you, about if it's the pain that matters more, if it's the noise that matters more, because you can find like looped toys that make a big like smack noise, but they don't hurt as much and don't leave as much of an impact. So I think that's something that you can also talk about when you're talking about introducing impact play or continuing your impact play practices.
yeah, great note. Love that. Um, I'll do a little mention of electroplay, but I know Anna, you love electroplay, so you can definitely go off on that. But the neon wand, for example, is a great um kind of substitute for like a TENS machine, which can disrupt pain signals in the body, which can encourage the body to release pain relief hormones. Um, Anna, please, if you want to say more about electroplay, please do.
I am I love a neon wand. I think one I just want to mention too that sensory play is a great tool with HEDS,
Yeah.
especially one, your skin is more sensitive, so it's a great time. There are so many avenues of sensory play to explore, and especially if you're dealing with things like labial edema, like things are swelling, you're having reactions to lube or pain with penetration. There are so many ways where you can incorporate sensory play and kind of rely on that being the meat of your sexual experience with a partner. It's super fun. Highly recommend as something to explore if you're struggling a lot with traditional like P and V sex. But electroplay is truly like Nick said, like the shock can help with those muscle like signals and just help relieve a little bit of pain. I mean, a TENS unit is everything when you have some tight muscles. And so introducing it in a sexy way can be so fun. Not to mention like it looks cool as hell. I don't know if you've ever seen a neon one. But with electroplay, I just wanted to add that if you are someone who finds that the neon wand or violet wand, the kind of traditional ones, aren't strong enough for you, if you add a little bit of water-based lube, that the like what are they called, electrolytes in it, something, it helps it conduct better and it'll give you a stronger zap. So if you would like to up your electroplay game for anyone who is experienced in it, add a little bit of water-based lube to help like conduct the electricity better. But that is a great tool. And yes, I agree with the TENS unit comment.
Yes, yes.
Also, there's so many cool attachments. Like you can get the power tripper where you can use your hands now become the electrified object. So imagine like an electric massage. How fun and sensual could that be?
Dreaming.
I know, right?
Yeah, cool. So moving into just a little bit of aftercare. I mean, you're gonna know your body the best as someone who has hEDS. Um, and it's okay to give your body a big rest after engaging in any kind of kink play. Even if your body isn't feeling that much in pain after. I know for me, the 24-hour mark after I'm doing something is when I really feel it the most. And so, making sure you're taking those preventative measures to help your body before it starts to go downhill is really important. You can use heating packs, heat cream, CBD THC cream, I personally love, um, magnesium salt baths, anything that you're gonna do that is gonna help recover your body, definitely engage in after you are having play and scenes, even if you don't feel it. Please do it ahead of time.
I want to say too, I know, I feel like it's a concept we all know, but maybe need to hear one more time. It is so much easier to stop pain from happening than to stop it from when it's already started to happen, than to curb it when it's already started. It is so much easier to stop it from happening at all. So please do the preventative measures. Don't wait until you're in pain to take the Advil. Like, relax. Also, you mentioned the CBD cream. I want to say there are CBD lubes as well. So highly recommend those if you are struggling with pain during penetration. That might be a great option for you. They are almost always oil-based lubes, so be careful when using those nice latex condoms. But
Yes. And we're getting a little into personal experience, which we can definitely talk more about. But I will say one of the preventative measures that I've personally started taking whenever I'm like going to like play or whatever, or even if I'm not, and it's just a possibility, I'm taking my high dose of acetaminophen before and after. I don't care if I don't feel anything. I'm preparing myself ahead of time. And I'm also making sure I'm taking my Lyrica on time.
so bro, I'm bringing my BioFreeze roll on, like
Of course, I've got my shoulder splint in the bag. Yeah, but okay, we could definitely talk more personal experience. But to wrap up in kink BDSM stuff, um, pain management using BDSM, as well as more conventional means, are definitely something that people with hEDS are exploring and are encouraged to explore. Um, because pain management, like non-kinky vanilla narratives of it, may not always do what you need it to do. So, exploring areas of pleasure and pain that you're being able to have control inflicting might be really good areas to explore, if you're hypermobile. Um, Especially just having that space to engage with pain and be able to react emotionally to pain without stigma, might be really healing in a lot of ways. And also just a really good way to like figure out more things about your body that maybe you didn't know before. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's all I have
Yeah.
for kink, but we can definitely talk some more personal experience.
Yeah, I think it's also important to take away from this that we are experts in our own experience. Not everyone with hEDS or HSD's experience. We have our own comorbidities that impact our and influence the way that we're interacting with these ideas and concepts. So, like, take what fits, leave what doesn't, but definitely consider exploring sensory play if you never have before, and watch your pain management. Take care of yourself. It's yeah, I think also too, I want to mention that like it is sexy to negotiate sex. It is sexy. Don't feel like you're awkward or weird for being like, hey, so like I am really not into this, or I really want to do this. Like it is sexy to talk about what you like and don't like. Don't let like heteronormative narratives of sex impact you getting what you need and the accommodations you need during sex.
Yes, and don't let internalized ableism get in the way of you experiencing pleasure in the moment. The amount of times I have been laying on my back, I am enjoying what's going on below me, but I'm starting to feel my hips subluxate or dislocate, it takes it out. Like I'm fully out of it. So if I'm able to accommodate myself by putting a pillow underneath each of my hip before or during or when I start to feel that pain, like it is so much easier to bring myself back into it, than it is to like try to just work through that pain that I didn't welcome.
Yes. Yes, I feel that so much. Like you are, you don't have to be like a certain level of disabled to need accommodations or to use these accommodations. It's okay if you don't need them. if they make your life better, you need them. Use them. It's okay. Anyone can use these. And anyone, able-bodied or not, can use a positioning pillow, right? Like, it is hot to use one. It is hot to accommodate yourself appropriately. Like, you don't have to reach a certain level of pain before you need to bring these in. You can bring them in from the beginning. It's okay. It's hot. It's cool. It's very sexy.
Yes, and you know what else is hot and cool and very sexy? Using your mobility aids before and after playing. I love to like know that I'm having like a play session later in the day and I can like use my cane to like reduce my level of pain before I even get there. And then you know what? Maybe if I have to use it the day after, it's probably likely because after sex, after play, pain is like so real. And
Mm-hmm.
like I just want to name that too. Like it is
Yeah.
a privilege. I don't know where I saw this, and I should find out, but it is a privilege to not be in pain after sex. And so let your body normalize being in pain after sex if that's your normal.
Yeah. Like, I think we have this idea of if we're feeling pain during or after sex, that we are broken. There is something wrong with us. And there doesn't have to be. I mean, if you were in excruciating pain, yeah, maybe go talk to a doctor, go see what's up. But your normal everyday pain, the pain that comes specifically from sex, you're not broken. It's okay. Normalize it. If it's going to happen, plan for it and find ways that you can mitigate that pain for yourself if it's really bothersome. But it might just be something that you're living with and you can accommodate and normalize. It's okay. Yeah.
And communicate your like pain,
Yeah.
your daily pain, because pain might change throughout the day, throughout the hours. Like communicate that to the person you're having these play scenes, these sexy times, whatever it is with. Make sure that they know that that's going on. So like that it's not just up to you to be able to like care for yourself, but someone's also watching out for you and like can help you identify things that might be a little riskier before maybe you even do.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're having sex with someone who doesn't want to accommodate you, stop having sex with them. They suck.
Yeah. And we love some crip for crip sex.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, well, this is great.
This is really fun.
Yeah, I will also note that we will have listed resources and references in the description, assuming that that is where this platform goes. Um, and timestamps ideally will also be there. Um, yes. Any other wrapping up things that you want to throw out there?
Thank you for spending an hour with us talking about the things that we're really nerdy about. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah, I love talking about crib sex with you.
Yeah, it's my
Yeah,
favorite thing to do.
love it. Okay, well, thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.